The town of Red Willow sat where the prairie broke into stone, a place built by stubborn hands and kept alive by silence. Wind ruled more than law there, and memories lingered longer than people. Ezra Cole had lived on the edge of that town for 12 years, in a weather-beaten ranch house with a fence that leaned like an old man too tired to stand straight. Folks said he was a good cowboy, quiet, reliable, and hard as the land itself. But they also said he carried something broken inside him. Ezra never corrected them. He had learned that some wounds survived best when left unnamed. Every morning before the sun rose, Ezra saddled his horse and rode the same fence line, checking posts, mending wire, doing work that kept his hands busy and his thoughts quiet. He avoided town unless supplies demanded it, and when he went, he kept his hat low and his eyes lower. That was how he had lived since the day. Grief taught him how dangerous looking could be, because looking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. The house beside his ranch had stood empty for years, its windows dusty and doors swollen from rain. Ezra barely noticed it anymore. Until the morning a wagon rolled in and stopped there. He watched from a distance as a woman stepped down, her boots touching Red Willow soil for the first time. She moved carefully, like someone learning a new land. Her hair was dark, braided simply, and her posture carried both strength and weariness. Ezra felt something tighten in his chest, an old pain stretching awake. He turned away and rode harder than necessary, angry at himself for noticing at all. Her name was Clara Whitfield, though Ezra wouldn't know that for weeks. The town noticed her immediately. A woman alone always drew attention, especially one who carried herself with quiet dignity instead of fear. She fixed the old house with her own hands, hired no help, and spoke politely but briefly to anyone who tried to pry. Ezra made it a point not to be among them. He took longer routes to avoid passing her land. He adjusted his schedule so he wouldn't see smoke from her chimney or her figure working in the yard. It was foolish, he knew, but pain had taught him to be cautious. Clara noticed him anyway. It was hard not to notice a man who lived that close and never once looked your way. She saw him riding at dawn, always distant, always turned away. At first she thought he disliked her, then wondered if she had done something wrong. Eventually curiosity replaced concern. Red Willow was a lonely place, and loneliness sharpened questions. One afternoon, as Ezra was repairing a fence near the property line, he sensed someone behind him. He stiffened, already annoyed, and turned to find Clara standing a few steps back, her hands folded loosely in front of her. She didn't smile, didn't accuse. She simply looked at him, steady and patient. The wind tugged at her braid, and for a moment Ezra forgot how to breathe. "You live next to me," she said calmly. "But you act like I'm not there." Ezra swallowed and looked past her, fixing his eyes on the horizon. "Busy man," he muttered. Clara studied him, not unkindly. "Busy enough to avoid me every day?" The words struck deeper than she knew. Ezra's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her to leave, to mind her business, to let him keep his distance in peace. Instead, silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally she spoke again, her voice softer now. "My neighbor said, 'Why do you keep avoiding me?'" She paused, waiting. "I'm asking the same thing." Ezra closed his eyes. The answer rose uninvited, raw and honest, dragged up from a place he rarely allowed himself to visit. When he opened them again, he finally looked at her, really looked, and the pain hit like a gunshot. Her eyes were the same color as the woman he had buried years ago, the same steady warmth, the same quiet understanding. His chest burned. "Because looking at you hurts," he said, his voice low and rough. Clara didn't step back. She didn't press forward either. She simply absorbed the words, letting them settle. "Hurts how?" she asked. Ezra shook his head. "Doesn't matter." But it did matter. He could feel it in the way she remained, in the way she didn't demand or retreat. That frightened him more than anger ever could. He turned away, gathered his tools, and walked back toward his horse without another word. Clara watched him go, confusion and something deeper flickering across her face. That night Ezra slept poorly. Memories came uninvited, the smell of rain-soaked earth, laughter echoing through the old version of his house, hands that once fit perfectly in his wife, Anna, had died during a winter sickness that swept through the territory like a curse. He had watched her fade, helpless, and afterward the world had lost its color. Since then, Ezra had learned to live in gray. Clara's presence threatened that fragile balance. Days passed, and avoidance became harder. Clara waved when she saw him. Sometimes she left a basket of bread on the fence line, never forcing an interaction. Ezra told himself to ignore it, yet he always took the bread once she was gone. It tasted of warmth and effort, of care he hadn't known in years. Each bite was both comfort and punishment. Slowly, against his will, he began to notice her routines, her resilience. She worked from sunrise to dusk, repaired what was broken, and spoke kindly even to those who gossiped about her. Red willow softened around her, the way dry ground softens after rain. Ezra resented that too. Hope was dangerous. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and violent. Thunder cracked the sky, and rain poured hard enough to flatten the grass. Ezra spotted Clara's barn door flapping wildly in the wind. Without thinking, he rode out, securing it before damage could spread. When he finished, he turned to leave, only to find Clara standing there, soaked and shivering. "You didn't have to," she said. He shrugged. "Did anyway." They stood under the barn's overhang, rain hammering the earth around them. The closeness was unavoidable now. Ezra could feel her presence like heat. Clara looked at him carefully. "You said looking at me hurts," she said. "I'm sorry if I remind you of someone you lost." Ezra exhaled slowly. "You do. Was she your wife?" He nodded. Clara's eyes softened. "Then I won't apologize for existing," she said gently. "But I will say this. Pain doesn't mean something is wrong. Sometimes it just means something mattered." Her words struck deep. Ezra had spent years convincing himself that distance was strength, that isolation was safety. Yet here was a woman who refused to be pushed away by his silence, who stood in the storm and spoke truth without cruelty. The idea terrified him. When the rain eased, Clara stepped back. "I won't chase you," she said. "But I won't disappear either." Ezra watched her walk back to her house, the storm washing the dust from the land. Something inside him shifted, unsettled. For the first time in years, he felt the ache of possibility and the fear that came with it. He didn't know it yet, but avoiding her was already becoming impossible. After the storm, Red Willow felt different to Ezra, as if the land itself had shifted. He told himself nothing had changed, yet his horse carried him past Clara's fence more often than before. Sometimes he slowed without realizing it. Sometimes he caught himself listening for movement from her place. Each time he cursed his weakness, but the silence he had once depended on no longer felt like protection. It felt empty. Clara kept her word. She didn't chase him, didn't force conversation, didn't demand explanations. But she also didn't vanish. She lived fully, visibly, her presence steady as a fence post, driven deep into the soil. Ezra began to understand that avoidance had never erased pain. It had only kept him frozen inside it. Clara's nearness stirred memories he had buried, and with them came grief, sharp and alive. But also something else he hadn't felt in years, warmth. One morning, Ezra found her struggling to free a calf, tangled in wire near the creek. Without thinking, he dismounted and helped, his hands working automatically beside hers. They didn't speak until the animal was safe. Then Clara looked at him and smiled, not triumphant, not relieved, just grateful. Ezra felt his chest tighten again, but this time the pain wasn't unbearable. It was quieter, more human. They began speaking in small pieces after that, a few words at a time. Nothing heavy, nothing dangerous, or so Ezra pretended. But stories leak through cracks whether you invite them or not. Clara spoke of losing her parents young, of learning to depend on herself because no one else would. Ezra listened more than he spoke. Listening felt safer than remembering. Eventually, remembering found him anyway. One evening, sitting on the fence between their lands, Ezra finally spoke of Anna, of her laughter, her stubborn kindness, but her strength during the sickness that took her. His voice broke when he admitted the truth, that after she died, he had stopped living and called it loyalty. Clara didn't interrupt. She let silence do its work. "You didn't lose her by loving again," she said softly. "You lost yourself by stopping." The words cut clean, not cruel. Not gentle either, honest. Ezra realized then that avoiding Clara had never been about her resemblance to Anna. It had been about fear, fear that opening his eyes would reopen his heart, and fear that reopening his heart would mean surviving pain instead of hiding from it. Winter crept in slowly, then all at once. A sickness spread through town, mild for most, dangerous for some. When Ezra fell ill, Clara was the one who noticed his horse unsaddled at dawn. She didn't ask permission. She came anyway. She tended him without drama, without promises, without fear of his grief. In his fever, Ezra dreamed of Anna and woke to Clara's steady hands. For the first time, the memories didn't tear him apart. They rested beside the present instead of fighting it. When Ezra recovered, something inside him had settled. He didn't mistake Clara for his past, and he didn't try to replace what was gone. He understood now that love wasn't a single story you told, once and buried with the dead. It was a choice you made again, when you were brave enough to feel. One evening, as the sun burned red across the prairie, Ezra finally said what he should have said from the beginning. He looked at her fully, without flinching, without turning away. "I avoided you because looking at you hurt," he admitted. "But it hurt because I wasn't done healing." Clara nodded. "Healing hurts too." They stood together in the quiet, not rushing, not pretending pain had vanished. Ezra knew grief would always be part of him, but it no longer ruled him. He had learned that memory and hope could share the same ground, just like past and future shared the same sky. Red Willow noticed the change long before Ezra did. He smiled more. He spoke more. The land around his ranch felt less heavy, less haunted. Clara didn't save him. She didn't replace anyone. She simply stayed long enough for him to choose life again. And in the end, Ezra understood the truth he had run from for years. Avoiding pain had never protected his heart. It had only kept it. Empty moral lesson. Avoiding people because they remind you of pain does not heal wounds, it deepens them. True healing begins when we face our grief, honor what we lost, and allow ourselves to live again without guilt or fear.